This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Well, hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southridge Church, and I'm with Scott Beha, our lead pastor. And before we go any further, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. So we are in our Rise and Fall series again this week. We have just a couple more weeks left. But this week was kind of interesting because the chapter we covered is also listed in the book of Psalms, but it is where David took a break from what was going on to practice remembering and just share who God is and what he's done and all these things. And so you brought up how in our lives, it's important to practice this, but in the busyness of life, we often don't take time to do this. And so often we're anxious or we're dealing with stuff and we maybe wouldn't so much if we would actually pause to reflect and do this. So Pastor Scott, in the practice of remembering, what is it that, what can happen in our spiritual lives when we don't intentionally take time to pause and reflect and praise God in this way?
Yeah, so I think what happens is because we live in a really fast-paced society and we're all being trained to look ahead all the time. What's next, what's next, what's next, what's next. Like before you even get to whatever's next, you need to have a plan for whatever's after that. And so this is the way that we live our lives. And so often we're just going from hey, we woke up, we got the kids at school, we came to work, pick them up from school or sports practice, make dinner, do homework, get them to bed. I pour myself into bed in the evening, and then we just do that over and over and over and over. And then on the weekends, when it's supposed to be rest time, instead we're running from activity to activity to activity, or we're working more. And there's no place in our schedule where we just look back and reflect and review, right? It's always forward, 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 what's next, what's next, what's next, which is good, but you have to have that time of reflection as well, because if not, what happens is you forget that some of the stuff that you're going through right now that is causing, and listen, when I say some of the stuff that you are going through, I didn't do a great job of this on Sunday of pointing this out. I was talking to myself all day Sunday.
Yeah.
I was in a situation last week personally that I know why we did this sermon. It was 100% for me. That I was overwhelmed with worry and anxiety and what's next and what if, and I can't hardly hold it together because I'm afraid of this and I'm worried about this. That it was when I was sitting there talking, I was like, this is everything I need to hear. If I don't stop and remember that I was driving around Saturday and processing just the horrible week that I had had mentally and just. And I said, Scott, everything that you're afraid of right now, you have had stuff in the past that you thought was way worse than this happen. And it's okay. You're still standing. You're still alive and kicking. And that's what happens is if we don't remember, we've probably been here before. We've dealt with this before, or if not exactly this, something we've dealt with some stuff. God has dealt with some stuff in our lives. He's been there with us. But if we don't ever look back and remember that, then the next time that we face a challenge, it'll feel like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And I go, hey, don't forget, you've been around this before. God's always been with you. He's always been faithful. And so if we don't make a practice of that, again, the goal of life is not to always be looking behind you. That's not a way to do it. And it's not to look behind you to even look at your failures other than maybe to glimpse at them long enough to learn something from them. We should be looking ahead. We should be moving forward. What's next? What does God have next for us as a church? What does God have next for us as a family, as an individual, as a professional? Whatever it is, we should be looking forward, but we need those moments where we just stop and pause. And I'll just be honest, the modern people do not do this very well.
Yeah.
But the ancient people did.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you shared maybe first service, and I think you had it in your notes, but cut it for second. You shared about how this was a regular rhythm for the Israelites to take time to do this. I mean, when you're looking through Exodus, right? Like as soon as they come through the Red Sea, Miriam stops and does like a song of praise. And so how can we look at that rhythm a little deeper and then see how we can maybe take moments to do that in our life as well?
God wove this into the whole fabric of Israel. This whole idea of stopping to reflect and remember. You see it first and foremost, if you're reading the Old Testament, you'll see exactly what we saw in 2 Samuel 22, that the narrative sometimes just stops and somebody breaks out in song, whether it's Miriam, whether it's Moses, whether it's David, like somebody just breaks out in psalm in a time of remembrance.
Yeah.
And it's like that happens so often that you go, man, they really understood this. You also have like a whole book in the Old Testament called the Psalms that are literally like a stop and a pause and a praise. Right? It's just like this is who these people were. They were writing songs. They were taking time to stop and reflect on these songs. So the way they were constantly reminded of who God is, what he has done, what it's like when he shows up, where they've been and where he's taking them. Like they're always reminding themselves of this. And then you even see this on another level. This is why the Jewish people had these yearly festivals as well. Everything about their life was meant to help them to remember what God had done.
Yeah.
So like they have the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover every single year to remember what God has done. They have the Feast of Tents or Tabernacles. That way they remember their time in the wilderness. They have all these different things to remember every year. And then, even though it was one of the 10 Commandments, we've come to know this as a blessing. They also had a weekly rhythm of stopping and pausing. And it's for one day, don't produce. For one day, soul care.
Yeah.
Tend the garden of your heart. Take care of your family. Reconnect with the Lord. You are not supposed to produce 7 days a week. So the Old Testament people, they got this through their festivals, through their weekly Sabbath, through just random pauses and praise. In even the text, we see it happen. That when they got on the other side of something, it was like, there's going to be a pause and we're going to sit here and reflect about what God has done. And then they would pass these stories down one generation to another. That way, even when the generation that experienced it was dead and gone, the next generation knew about it because they were sitting around and talking about the goodness of God and how God had brought them from where they were. And so we need that. Yeah. We need that as the New Testament church in a modern world. We need our own rhythms. First and foremost, if you are not practicing Sabbath one day a week to reconnect with God, and nobody expects you to produce anything, then you're already behind the 8 ball when it comes to reflection and remembering, which means that you're probably going to have higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of stress, higher levels of worry, lower faith, lower trust, because faith and trust are built by remembering. Faith and trust are torn down by anxiety, worry, and stress. And so a weekly rhythm of Sabbath, a weekly rhythm of worship, right? We know the average person attends church now. I think the new number is like 1.3 to 1.8 times a month. We don't necessarily see that phenomenon large scale here at Southridge. We have really consistent attendance, but most people that attend barely over once a month would consider themselves regular attenders. If you don't have a regular habit of worship, that's one of the powerful things about worship. We come here, we sing these songs, so the way we have a pause in our week where we go, wow, look what God has done. Look at who God is. Look at how God has saved me and all these things. That's why it's one of those things. Like if you don't have good church attendance, I'm not shaming you into good church attendance the way for selfish reasons or anything. I'm just saying there's a purpose in what we're doing. It builds your faith up. It's going to improve your life to have a regular time of worship. And if you don't get that on Sunday, then you got to be getting that when you're in the car, listening to worship. You got to have regular rhythms of just stopping and pausing and worshiping to remind your heart, remind your soul. Can you keep building your faith in those ways? The Old Testament people did this very good. New Testament people, we really need to work on stopping, slowing down, pausing. I tell my basketball players right now, we're learning how to run this one offense, and they are in such a hurry all the time. I said, listen, this is very ineffective if you go at this pace. You have to slow down to watch the whole thing develop for this to be effective. That's the same with your life. If you are going at breakneck speed all the time and you don't slow down and watch your life develop, it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's great. I know, of a couple people who keep like gratitude journals, they call them, and do that kind of thing. I just, last night was looking at my week and was like, oh, I'm going to need to take like a half Sabbath Thursday into Friday, like to get my full Sabbath in. And then also like I have a 24-hour solitude retreat coming up for Leadership Focus. And I've purposely scheduled it for in December because I wanted to be able to do it at the end of the year to kind of reflect back on the year before I look at anything else going forward. And I'm actually really excited for it, maybe even more so after this past Sunday. But David does something interesting where he starts off with who God is, remembering who God is before he gets into anything about what God has done. And you shared how, it is more important. Like if all like who God is enough for our worship and for our praise, if there was nothing else in the world that happened. But I think, often I think we forget maybe a little bit about who he is and just how great and mighty and wonderful that he is. And so I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit more and why this matters so much for our faith.
Yeah, I'll be honest. If it weren't for the blessing of God, I think God would have a lot less fans, to be honest. And that's the sad reality because we read it in the scriptures. When you read in like Romans chapter 1, they traded the worship for the Creator for that of the created order. That's who we are. If our lives are not interfered with by the grace and the mercy of Jesus, that is who you are. You will worship created things rather than the Creator. We all have a tendency to do this. This is how we got in this situation in the first place. If you go back to the narrative in the garden, it's they want to eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Because they don't want to ultimately worship the Creator. They want to be the Creator. They want to be worshiped. They want to be in the control seat. So they would rather, worship created things rather than ultimately the Creator. That's who we are at our core if Jesus doesn't intersect that. And so we have to be very, very cognizant of our own reasons why we are pursuing God, right? 15 years of ministry. Getting ready to start my 15th year of ministry in two weeks. I see a lot of people, they come to God only when things are bad. If you come to God only when things are bad because you need Him to fix something, you're coming after what He can do for you. You're not coming after Him. Those two things, whether or not you're coming after Him or whether you're coming after what He can offer you, ultimately will determine the fervency of your relationship with God and the seriousness. I really think the reason why, this is going to probably sting a little bit. I've been trying to process with people that are trying to help me formulate the future of this church. And when we talk about, and this is no secret to anyone, the financial troubles of this church. They go, how do you have such a big church that has such severe finances? And I go, I think that some of it is the spiritual fervency of the people. Because you don't people that have really been captured by the gospel don't have to be begged to be generous.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you get someone that is more interested in what God can do for them than God themselves, the spiritual fervency will be much lower there. And so that's why you have to beg people with low spiritual fervency to give, to serve, to join a group. Because people who actually see God as the prize and not what God can do for them, they don't really have to be asked to do anything. They feel led to do the things that they ought to do. And so I think it's a sad reality. Like if you are a consumer in a church, it's probably because you think that the church exists for you. If you're a contributor in a church, it's because you've come to understand that the church exists for God. Right? So if all you ever do at a church is fill up a seat, you don't serve, you don't give, you don't get into a relationship, you think that the church exists for you. And that's what, like, we both have ran our hospitality ministry here. We probably both ran into people that I had multiples that they would start serving on the first impressions team, and then because we asked them to stay for 15 minutes at the beginning of service to stay out in their positions, I had people quit. They go, well, I'm missing the music.
Right.
And I go, yeah. It's because you think that what we're doing here on Sunday is for you. We're not actually here for you. We're here for God. You can tell the difference in someone's spiritual fervency if they're here for God or if they're here for what God can offer them based on, did I show up to serve or to be served?
Right.
It sounds a lot like the words of Jesus, right? They'll just add, like and again, I'm not trying to push super hard. Maybe you're new to the church and still trying to figure things out. That's fine. There is a growing process.
Right.
Just saying you've been here a while, but you don't serve without a really legitimate reason. You probably think that you're exercising some sort of personal faith that's just all about you and God. And I come here, and it's like, no, you're missing it. You're really missing it. You may be more interested in what God can do for you than just having God. Like if you only got God, would it actually be enough? Right? This is one of my. I hear a lot of people. They go, "Oh, I cannot wait for quote unquote heaven." And I'm not going to get into another talk about that. Just whatever you think is next.
Yeah.
But I hear a lot of them that I go, oh, really? Yeah. I just can't wait to see my grandma again. I can't wait to see, my child or my husband, my spouse. And I go, huh. Who's first on that list that you want to see when you get there? Because if it's not Jesus, you might be in it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
It's cool that you're going to see granddad and all that. That's cool.
Yeah.
But like, I hear a lot of I can't wait to see them again. I go, do you long to see Jesus face to face? Because he's actually the true prize of all of it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. And there's just so much of that in the church. Like people will show up, they're in bad financial situation. They'll be at church 6 months in a row, and then somebody gets a new job. The blessing of God pours out on their life, and they're like, see you next time that the world's crashing down around me. And he goes, yeah, your faith wasn't sincere. Yeah. Oh, we come to church just because our marriage was a disaster. We come to church for about 2 years. Everything's put back together, and now we're like, you know what? We're good. Like, yeah, we'll pop in there every couple of months and stuff to keep up appearances, but like, no, we got what we were really looking for, right? And you go, yeah, that unfortunately that doesn't just happen in those extreme situations that I'm characterizing. That happens for a lot of people that are even regular attenders. It's like, I'm here for what I can get out of this. And if you're here for what you can get out of this, I would say you probably have some sort of faith, but I would wonder how fervent your faith is if it's not having an effect to bring you from being a consumer to a contributor. Consumers are only worried about themselves. Real Christians are not concerned about themselves and what they get out of it whatsoever. They understand Jesus is the prize, and they'll do anything that they can to exalt the name of Jesus and honor Jesus for who he is, what he's done, all this. And so that's that's the harsh reality behind. If you are more worried about what you get out of it than contributing to it, then you're probably here for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, that's good. And I think that, within that, I think that's where this reflection comes into play too, because I think that if you're doing this on a regular basis, I know that many people who start out their prayers even just immediately going into, God, I need this, like rather than, and we're not saying don't do that, because what David does in the next section is cry out to God, like talking about how when he cried out in distress, God answered him, God heard him, God was there. However, it's not the only time that David ever cried out to God. Like, David went to God consistently for many different reasons and many different things we saw. And so it wasn't just that.
Well, nobody likes somebody that only shows up when they need something.
Right. Yeah. I think we've all probably had that friend.
You're a poor friend if that's you.
Yeah.
Like, if you only show up when you need something, that's a bad relationship.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be in a relationship with you.
Yeah. So within that text, though, right, there was a part where he says, to the faithful, you are faithful to the. What attribute, what part of God's character? This is just a fun little personal question. What attribute of God or character of God has become really meaningful to you, especially in this season that you've been in?
The thing that means the most to me in this season has been God's grace for someone that so consistently seems to mess things up. It's if you went, maybe someday I'll die and everyone can have access to my prayer journals at that point, but you'll see one of the number one things that's written in my prayer journal is, I'm still just blown away that you haven't given up on me yet. Like, after day after day after day of listening to me whine and cry about being anxious and worried constantly and not learning my lesson, it is amazing to me that God has not thrown in the towel and gone, you know what? Is there not someone easier to be in relationship with than Scott? Because he's driving me insane. And it blows me away that he still, he hasn't given up on me. And that's the thing that probably sticks out to me the most, that I'm constantly writing about in my prayer journal.
Yeah, I think along the same lines for me right now is his gentleness, because I think he's teaching me that, like, for my own life with my children. And I've seen in those moments when I have come at it in a more gentle manner than whatever else I want to do, I've seen a lot better things actually happen in those moments. So I think that could be like a potential cool thing that you could do, is take time to like really reflect on what part of God's character and who he is that means the most to you in this season. Now, there was a moment in the text also where there was a little bit of tension, where you brought this up, where you might be reading it and thinking, well, how can David say this? We know that he just, did these things with Bathsheba and Uriah and all this. Like, how could he say he was blameless before God? And I find this interesting because I think that for most of us, we have a really hard time often forgiving ourselves or giving grace to ourselves than what we could believe that God could do. Like, sometimes we're harder on ourselves, or we're easy to forgive others. And I saw this in discussion with teens yesterday, even where, and I don't know why that is. Why do you think that is, that like we often could actually see ourselves and say, okay, yes, I did this thing, but I am now faithfully turned back to God and following him. How can we learn from David in this to actually extend that same grace and forgiveness to ourselves?
It really does come down to, most of us don't actually believe the gospel for ourselves. We just don't. We want it to be true. We think that it's true for other people, but we don't believe it for ourselves. So when we're the one that makes the mistake, it's very hard for us to believe that God is going to have grace with us. That's really what it comes down to. The other issue, like when you read David's words, like I've been sinless, I've been blameless, and all of us are like, well, wait a second, we just spent 3 weeks having to deal with your fallout from Bathsheba and Uriah and all that. Wait a second. The other thing is sometimes when we're reading stuff like this, like especially when you go to the Old Testament, this is the fallacy. Most people, let me help you when it comes to the Bible, how you can understand things better. If you try to deal with the Old Testament and ask New Testament questions with the Old Testament, so this is what people will do. They'll go, well, was David saved? Was David saved? I go, well, what do you mean by that? Exactly. Because they're looking at New Testament theology and trying to say, where was David at? Remember, David was in an old covenant. God was dealing with them differently. That's why you just mentioned that verse, that to the faithful you show yourself faithful, to the merciful. People in the Old Testament got exactly what they deserved. And so the way that David could say, I'm in right relationship with God, is that he just continued to be faithful. When he was unfaithful, he repented and then got back on the faithfulness track. Right? So he just never, that's why he's able to say that. So we're trying to think of it in terms of category, and he's going, no, we need to think of it in terms of covenant, right? And so, yes, I failed, but so therefore I faced the curse of that. That child did die after Bathsheba and all that. I faced the curse of that, and then I repented, and then I was faithful, and then I can now say I'm in right relationship with God because of this. And my point to us New Testament Christians is, what's the principle here is that it's the same thing for us, meaning that God is kind to us, not because of what we've done, but actually because of what Jesus has done. And so for David, God was good to him because he was adhering to the covenant. God is good to us because we adhere to the covenant, meaning we have accepted God's grace. So when in that passage, let me pull up those verses. Where did you go? I got them right here. Because I want to read this one part and point out something I could have pulled out in the sermon, but again, we would have been there for 4 hours. Where we go? To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. We've been talking about to the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show yourself with integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You rescue the humble, but your eyes watch the proud and humiliate them. Pause. You can tell that David is under the old covenant because to the faithful, you get faithfulness because you get whatever it is that you deserve. If you took these same verses and read them through a New Testament lens, it would say, to the unfaithful, you show yourself faithful. Why? Because of Jesus. To those with no integrity, you show yourself to be someone with integrity. Why? Because of Jesus. To those that are not pure, you still show up pure and make them pure. To the crooked, you don't show yourself shrewd. That's what happened in the old covenant. To the crooked, you show mercy and grace. You rescue the humble, but your eyes watch the proud and you humiliate them. It would say, yes, you rescue the humble, but your eyes watch the proud and show them grace because of Jesus. Right? Like this passage would have been so different under the New Testament. It would have all pointed to that first verse. To the faithful, you're faithful. It's like, no, listen.
Yeah.
The good news is that to the unfaithful, God is faithful because Jesus was faithful to the covenant on our behalf. And so it's a very beautiful reminder that God is good to us, not because we deserve goodness. God is good to us because of Jesus and his covenant-keeping act of self-giving love on the cross that changed us and changed this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you shared how like Jesus is our why. And I think that when we can shift our perspective from what we are doing to what Jesus did, then it can help us in that moment and in those areas of life to really give that kind of grace and say, no, like this is what I did, but this is not who I'm going to like what I'm going to continue to do or who I'm going to continue to be. Now, another portion you shared about how God's power through us, and how it wasn't in David's power that he was able to do anything that he did. It was all through God in him and through him that he was able to do this. And I'm not sure how much you expanded on it there, but how do you think it can change our lives when we truly understand and trust and believe that God will give us whatever it is that we need to do what he's asking us to do?
Yeah, David never once takes credit for all the things God has done through him. He understands that the one that gifted him, that gave him the skills, that gave him the ability, that gave him the health, that gave him the wisdom, that gave him the mind that operates to rule and to reign the way that he did, he always knew where all of that came from. And that made David able to be used by God, because he would be faithful, but he didn't have to have credit for what was going on. I really think what happens is we get a lot of people that they don't believe that God can do anything with them whatsoever, and it's because they're basing that thought off of just themselves. They're not bringing into account that God has power, God has gifts, God has abilities that he places within you, and that when you're weak, then God is strong. And so when you get that sort of confidence, then whatever God calls you to do, you can step boldly into it, because you realize it's not you. It's not you at that point. So you don't have to be fearful or worry that you're going to make a mistake or fail or whatever, because it's ultimately God's. If God called you to it, like, he's going to gift you for it. Like, it's just what it is. He's going to give you the strength. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work hard. You should definitely work hard. I'm not saying that. Like, I know there's preachers that are like, well, God's the one that speaks on Sunday, so I don't really prep anything. No. You work your butt off, and then you let God take it from there.
Yeah.
And it should be the same. No matter what it is that you do, whatever it is God's trying to accomplish through you, you work your butt off, and then you trust everything else up to God, knowing that he will come through if he's called you to it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think, one of the things that is very clear from this is that, and you started out with this, is that when you are in the habit of practicing remembrance and what God has done and who he is and all those things, then it strengthens us for whatever's coming next, but also allows us to face the future without fear, without anxiety, without stress or worry. But what, Pastor Scott, is a simple practice that somebody can start this week, today, to start this practice of remembering and reflecting?
If you're not a journaler, I would start to journal. I know it's hard for me to prescribe what works for me to absolutely everyone. But I think that there's something to a journal, that there's a record, you're keeping record that you can go back and read and go, man, we've been through a lot. God has been faithful, and I won't forget it because it's written down.
Yeah. And I think, like, science also shows that the act of actually writing something down instead of typing, it triggers a different part of your memory in your brain to remember it better.
Yeah.
And so there's spiritual component to it, but there's also scientific understanding of that helping you.
Yeah, there's a book,
as well.
Ann Voskamp, 1,000 Gifts. Like, she just started writing down her blessings and things, and it turned her life into a life of gratitude. And you would not until you saw the study on it, which we're going to get into a little bit of it in January on a Wednesday night thing that we're doing. Gratitude is a superpower if you want a healthy and satisfying life.
Yeah. That's good. Awesome. Well, there you have it. I hope that you will start journaling if you have not been doing that. And if you are, just maybe take it a little bit deeper, more regular. But we are going to be back here again next week with another extra point, going back into our Rise and Fall in 2 Samuel. Just 2 weeks left. So we'll give you some more practical next steps for your faith journey then.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.